Hello everybody, I'm Jodie Forrest, and today we continue with video 2 of this series about the astrology of 2020. Although we're focusing on 2020 in the series, today we're discussing a new moon and solar eclipse on December 26, 2019. The Sun and Moon will be at the 5th degree of Capricorn then, and Jupiter will be right next to them at the 6th degree. From our naked eye point of view, during a solar eclipse, the moon's disk appears to blot out some or all of the disk of the sun as the moon passes between the Earth and the sun, and it also passes across our line of sight to the sun, so to speak. Not all new moons are eclipses because they don't all happen along that line of sight. Some happen a little above it, some happen a little below it. A solar eclipse is a very powerful new moon because at least somewhere on the Earth people can see it happening. Simply put, astrological events or placements that we can observe with the naked eye are more powerful than events that we can't. Until about the 16th century and Galileo, we observed the skies with the naked eye. Remember, too, that astrology is much older than that. Cave art includes marks that kept track of lunar phases. Stone Age monuments, like Stonehenge, are often a kind of observatory. When the light of an equinox or a solstice struck a certain part of that monument in a certain way. Why are we looking at this December 26, 2019 new moon and solar eclipse chart today, instead of at the January 12th, 2020 chart of the exact Saturn-Pluto conjunction? Well, there are several reasons. Number one, because this eclipse chart is cast for Washington, D.C., it correlates to the mundane astrology of the United States. Mundane means the astrology of world events. So the eclipse chart for Washington, D.C., the legal seat of the American government, has much to do with the U.S. role in the astrology of world events surrounding that eclipse. Number two, the chart of the path of an eclipse's visibility across the planet is significant. It tracks where on Earth we Homo sapiens will most feel that eclipse's effects. Now, the ancients associated eclipses with all kinds of rather grim events, such as political unrest, failed crops, droughts, epidemics. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Human history is chock full of eclipses that did not produce calamities. However, although I'm not an expert in the astrology of the weather or of geological events, the path of an eclipse, particularly its totality, does seem to indicate where extreme weather or earthquakes are more likely to occur. For more about eclipses, meteorology, and volcanology, please explore Richard Nolly's excellent website, astropro.com. In our graphic, the dark gray line shows the path of the eclipse's totality. Shaded areas show the path of partial visibility. The closer a spot is to the path of totality, the closer the eclipse will be to total in that spot. It's likely that places in the total eclipse path, or people from those places, will be in the news more than areas in or people from the partial eclipse path, and that places or people in the partial eclipse path will be in the news more than those from areas outside the partial path. Reason number three, those of us who have natal planets or angles in the 5th degree of the cardinal signs, Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, and Libra, and also those of us who have planets or angles in approximately the first 10 degrees of those signs, are sort of the canaries in the coal mine for the impact of this eclipse. Jupiter, from the astrological, Earth-centered, naked eye point of view, is at the 6th degree of Capricorn, right next to the new moon at the 5th degree. Therefore, Jupiter is part and parcel of the energies of December 26th new moon solar eclipse. Jupiter's energies blend with, tinge, or color this new moon. Jupiter expands, boosts, and instills confidence in what it touches. It's like an amplifier. The moon reflects what it touches and makes it more subjective and emotional, as if it applies a kind of emotional reverb or echo. And the sun illuminates and activates, energizes what it touches, bringing it more into our conscious awareness, as if it were a battery. The eclipse happens in the 4th house of home, hearth, and roots. It focuses on how and why this country began, its roots, its foundations, and its history. We'll need to examine that history, the structure of our government, and what the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution were actually designed to do. Based on that history, we'll need to feel our way forward toward what we feel, the moon, are the right steps for this country to take next. You'll remember from our last video that in the Astrology of World Events, when Pluto transits through a sign, it brings up the shadow material of that sign. Pluto itself rules the deep unconscious, the collective unconscious, and our personal and collective psychological wounds. It rules sexuality, death and dying, the occult, depth psychoanalysis, and issues around power versus powerlessness. It also rules gut-level honesty. As Pluto travels through a sign, we see where the excesses of that sign have not been good for us or for the collective. The blind spots of that sign become very clear to most of us. In Capricorn, Pluto has been revealing the dark side of the patriarchy, of organized, authoritarian, conservative, or elitist governments, of hierarchies in society, class systems and caste systems, of corporations and their worship of the profit motive above all else. Pluto's been showing us the dark side of the will to power and control, as people, institutions, and governments try to claw their way to the top. Now, what does Jupiter add to this mix? I suspect that some people will try to use the upbeat energy of Jupiter to stay in denial just as long as they can, to think everything is fine, to be reactionary, to exaggerate and justify all the Capricorn shadow material, instead of acknowledging that it's more problematic now than ever before. Jupiter wants no limits. It wants to keep expanding forever. But the Earth and its resources do have limits, and so do we. I also suspect that there will be people who assess our global dilemma and are determined not to lose hope, which Jupiter also rules. We need that hope. We need to cultivate a vision of a more equitable and sustainable human future. That hope and that vision give us something to work for. The solar eclipse of December 26, 2019, happens at midnight 13 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time in Washington, D.C. I use Placidus houses, and there's a graphic of that eclipse chart. We are on to reason number 4. A major astrological event of 2020 is the exact conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in the 23rd degree of Capricorn on January 12th. Saturn rules reality testing, and in its own sign, Capricorn, it is particularly powerful. It rules assessing what is actually happening with observable and proven facts and figures. It rules the maturity not to lie to ourselves or to indulge in wishful thinking. It rules sizing up a situation, and if we don't like it, doing what we have to do to change that situation. As Saturn conjoins Pluto, we need to figure out the truths of what Pluto and Capricorn has been showing us, and do the difficult but necessary work of stopping our collision course with our self-created climate change, and with the human misery created for the have-nots by the haves. As Saturn meets Pluto, the rubber hits the road. As my fellow astrologer Michael Luton points out, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction doesn't just happen once on the 12th of January. It doesn't just appear and disappear. That conjunction has been building and becoming stronger and stronger until it reaches the degree and minute when it's exact on January 12, 2020. However, it's been applying for almost all of 2019. Applying is an astrologer's word for an aspect that hasn't completely formed yet, that is still building. Applying aspects are more powerful than separating ones. Separating aspects are leaving the place where they were exact. Wherever the 23rd degree of Capricorn falls in your birth chart is where you are most feeling the conjunction yourself. And if you have planets or angles near the 23rd degree of Aries, Cancer, or Libra, you've been feeling it there too. Jupiter will be in Capricorn on January 12th, not in the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, but next door to it. Closely aligned with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction will be the Sun, conscious, active awareness, and Mercury, how we think, communicate, teach, and learn. It wouldn't surprise me if some world situations came to a head around the exact conjunction, and in an unignorable way. We will need to use our smarts to accept what's happening, analyze it, and do something about it sooner rather than later, because climate change is accelerating. Saturn also rules the psychologist Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first of which are food, clothing, and shelter. The condition of the earth, which is our common shelter, demands a response. I suspect that Jupiter's entering Capricorn in early December will further accelerate climate change, and that has been in the news. More ice is melting, sea levels are rising, less oxygen in the water is affecting marine life. The percentage of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere is rising too, and so are the temperatures. More heat or moisture in the air creates more extreme storms. Finally, I'm talking about the December 26 new moon solar eclipse conjoined Jupiter and heralding the buildup to the January 12th conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, because Saturn and the moon have some interesting connections in astrology. In some ways, they represent polar opposites because they rule opposite signs. The moon rules Cancer and has a natural affinity with Cancer, while Saturn rules Capricorn and has a natural affinity with Capricorn. The moon is not linear. It represents our emotional needs, our subjective, reflexive reactions to whatever's going on around us, our feelings, our imagination, how we were nurtured, especially by mom, the beginning and the end of our lives, our roots, and how we do or don't nurture others and ourselves. Saturn is the most linear planet of all. It represents maturity, realism, reality testing, structure, the physical, material world of form, the passage of time, the wisdom that experience can bring, the ability to function and to thrive without depending on others, and the aging process. When I read my first astrology books when I was 8 years old, these two planets, Saturn and the Moon, seemed extremely different from each other. But the longer I work with these symbols, the more oddly connected to and reflective of one another the Moon and Saturn seem to be. Here are some examples. The transiting Moon's orbit is about 27.5 degrees, or about 28 days. Saturn's transiting orbit is about 29 years. Secondary progressions are an astrological technique that moves the planets ahead in the zodiac by about 1 day of progressed time for each year of real time. Therefore, the secondary progressed moons first return to the degree and minute of the sign where it was when you were born, your first progressed lunar return happens at about age 27 and a half, about a year and a half before our first transiting return at about age 29. And that is when Saturn arrives at the degree and minute of the sign where it was when we were born. Your second progressed lunar return happens at about age 55, or twice 27 and a half. I'm saying about because the moon speeds up and slows down a bit in its orbit around the Earth. Its orbit doesn't fit into a nice, neat, predictable equation because it's the moon. It's not linear. It's subjective, emotional, imaginative, intuitive, and ultimately not reliably measurable in terms of real time. That does not mean that the moon is irrational and can be discounted. It's just different than Saturn, whose second transiting return happens at about age 58. The third progressed lunar return occurs at about age 82 and a half, and the third transiting Saturn return occurs at about age 87. Again, the moon rules how comfortable we are in the inner world of feeling. It rules our emotional needs, our imagination, the beginning of life, early childhood, our family, our roots, how we were and were not nurtured, and how well we nurture ourselves. The moon also rules the end of life. If that doesn't make sense to you, think about what a Native American man once said. A warrior is wise to be kind and respectful to women, for they have the charge of him at the beginning and the end of his life. On the other hand, real, physical, measurable time is Saturn's domain. Saturn rules mathematics, the geophysical sciences, architecture, that which can be observed and measured, time and the passage of time. It rules maturity and the aging process. It rules structure, organization, hierarchies, and chains of command. It rules authority and authority figures. It rules our practical adaptations to the physical environment. It rules anything that we have to build through our own efforts. It's like a bank account with no interest and no fees. What we put into a Saturn-influenced area is what we get out of it. No more and no less. It rules where we must assess reality carefully and make practical adaptations to it. Saturn is not hostile, it's neutral. Again, we have our first progressed lunar return at about age 27 and a half, and our first transiting Saturn return at about age 29. Those two astrological events mark our emotional and our real world, practical, coming of age. Movies are full of coming of age films where the hero or heroine is 13 years old or 17 or 25. However, astrologically, our coming of age starts at the beginning of the first lunar return at about age 27 and a half, and it continues until the end of the first Saturn return at about age 30 or 31. Many astrologers think that the Saturn return lasts all during the approximately 2.5 years that Saturn transits through the sign where it was when we were born. It's as if we grow up emotionally, the first progressed lunar return, before we grow up experientially, or in terms of our status or demographical position in the real world, the first Saturn return. This timing is so important to us psychologically. We need to understand at an intuitive, emotional, or gut level what we feel and what we need to be happy, the moon, before we can work through, on a practical, dispassionate level, what we need to do or change in the outside world, Saturn, to create the conditions in which we are and will continue to be happy, the moon. Otherwise, why bother to make changes? If we don't know what we feel and what we truly want, it's much harder to figure out where to go and how to get there. Right now, some of you may be thinking, but I don't think I did what I should have done to be happy when I was 27 or 29 years old. If you were thinking that, you're not alone. Many, many people would say exactly the same thing. Do we get a do-over? Not exactly, but any time that Saturn or the Moon in your natal chart are experiencing dynamic events, transits, progressions, or solar arcs involving either Saturn or the Moon, then you do get a chance to understand your emotional needs better. That's the Moon. Or how best to arrange your life so that you can meet those needs. That's Saturn. If you have natal planets in the early degrees of Capricorn in particular, and also in the first 10 degrees of Aries, Cancer, or Libra, you'll be feeling the energy of the eclipse on December 26th in whatever houses of your birth chart contain or aspect the first 10 degrees of Capricorn. Again, the planet Jupiter in 6 Capricorn will conjoin the Sun and the Moon in 5 degrees of Capricorn. In a birth chart, Jupiter correlates with where we can find hope and optimism. What makes life worth living for us? What makes us think everything's for the best and the best of all possible worlds? It relates to optimism, faith, renewal, blessings, visions of the future, generosity, grandiosity, organized religion, higher education, philosophy, travel, inner and outer quests, and how we view and deal with cultures that are very different from our own. Wherever the first 10 degrees of Capricorn fall in your birth chart, the eclipse of December 26th asks you to open your mind, indulge your curiosity, and open your heart to that which is foreign to you. You may need to flex. You may need to give up some long-held opinions. You may need to abandon the opinion that you're right with a capital R all the time. And I can just about guarantee that if you do so, you'll get a big shot in the arm. And that shot will consist of more hope about your future, and perhaps about the human future, than you may have felt in a long time. So how does this new moon conjoined Jupiter affect us at a global level? This new moon and solar eclipse in Capricorn, conjunct Jupiter, is preparing the emotional ground for the Saturn-Pluto conjunction on January 12th, 2020. There's a graphic of a chart of that conjunction run for Washington, D.C. I see Jupiter as more directly involved in the December 26 eclipse chart. Remember that the eclipse, a lunar event, precedes the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, a Saturnian event. Emotional awareness seems to precede a Saturnian review of what's happening and what to do about it. So enjoy your holidays, however you do or don't celebrate them. One of Jupiter's personifications could be Santa Claus or the Christmas spirit. Immerse yourself in those seasonal feelings about peace on earth and of goodwill toward everyone who shares the planet with you. And carry those benevolent energies into and throughout 2020 with you, please. We need clear-eyed, determined, wise, realistic, and hopeful people to spearhead the changes that we need to make. Even one person and even one act can make a difference.